The historical chart page can be reached from the home page by clicking on this button. Let me show you an example of a simple chart. I'll explain the features of historical charts first, then I'll explain how to set your criteria to request all the different types of historical charts. This simple chart shows the change in typical values of houses in Cumberland Park, which is in Adelaide. It's over a 3-year period. Note that I'm in trial mode, so the data is not real. The months are shown along the bottom horizontal x-axis. The left vertical y-axis shows the scale of typical values in dollars. If you hover your mouse over a point on the curve, a box appears showing more details for that point. You can see the typical value for Cumberland Park houses at the month I'm hovering over. You can also see some calculations of the change in typical value. These calculations are for the period since the start of the chart up to this point that I'm hovering over. The change is displayed in dollars, total percent, and percent per annum, or rate of change. Going to the far right and hovering over the last month will show the same calculations, but for the entire 3-year period. Now remember, I'm in trial mode, so these numbers are not real. Historical charts are an easy way to calculate the change in value for any metric over any period. All right, let me show you how I requested this report. The end month is defaulted to the latest month for which we have data, but you can change it to a month in the past. You might like to do this to see how prices ended up in, say, 2019, for example. The number of months is how many months to show on the chart. We only publish data dating back to 2010 on this website. And because of that, if you set the end month to a month in the distant past, like say 2012, then in that case you wouldn't see more than 2 years of historical data. That would be the 2 years from 2010 ending 2012. But anyway, most researchers want to see the latest data. And in this case, I've left the end month to the default, which is the latest month at the time of recording. This is where you specify what you want to see on the chart. You can see the primary metric field is set to typical value. The primary metric is the one with the scale shown up the left vertical y-axis. You can select a secondary metric, which I'll come to later. The table you see contains only a single row. Each row in the table represents something to plot on the chart. In this case, there's only one thing to plot on the chart, a single line showing the change in typical values for Cumberland Park houses. Let's add another plot. Suppose I want to compare the growth of Cumberland Park houses against the growth of Adelaide houses. I mean Adelaide the city, not Adelaide the suburb. To add another plot to the chart, I click on the Add Plot button. A dialog appears allowing me to specify the details of this second plot. Start with the market. I type in Adelaide SUA and select it from the drop-down. Houses are already selected as a property type for this plot. Don't worry about the advanced features, I'll get to that in a few minutes. Now if I click on the Add Plot button, the dialog is closed and the plots table is refreshed, showing a new row. The new row is for Adelaide. All right, let's have a look at this new historical chart. Now you can see 2 lines on the chart, one for Cumberland Park and one for all of Adelaide. The legend at the top shows which is which. You can hover over a market in the legend to highlight its line on the chart. The line is also highlighted when you hover your mouse over a part of that line on the chart. The other line is faded. And the pop-up shows which line you are pointing at. It's not easy to see which market had the most growth because they started at different values. At the right side of the chart, we can hover over the last month for each market to see which market had the most capital growth. I mentioned before that you can add a secondary metric. Let's plot the history of Cumberland Park's vacancy rate alongside its typical value history. Firstly, I click on the Plot a Secondary Metric checkbox to show the secondary metric drop-down. If you click in the box, a list of metrics will appear. You can scroll down the list to see what metric you would like. Or you can start typing the name of a metric to refine the list of options. I'm going to choose vacancy because it is quite a volatile metric. I'll explain volatility in a minute. Note that I can remove a plot from the chart by clicking on the trash can icon. I can also change a plot by clicking on the pencil icon. Instead of adding a third plot, I'm going to change the second plot from Adelaide's typical value to Cumberland Park's vacancy rate. So I click on the pencil icon. The Edit Plot dialog appears, but this time it's a bit more complicated. It has some extra features because I have selected a secondary metric. Firstly, let me change the market from Adelaide to Cumberland Park. I'll leave the property type as houses, and then I can change the metric from primary, which is typical value, to secondary, which is vacancy. When I click on the Save Changes button, the table of plots is updated to show Cumberland Park twice. One row is for typical values and the other row is for vacancy rate. Let's request this report and see what the chart looks like. You will see the Adelaide typical value curve has now been replaced with Cumberland Park vacancy. Over on the right side of the chart, there is a new vertical y-axis that shows the range of values for vacancy. Notice how volatile the vacancy rate line is. Volatility is seen in charts when the line bounces up and down from month to month. Vacancy is usually a volatile metric at the suburb level because the volume of data it is based on is quite small. Vacancy is not measured across all properties in a suburb, but only across the rental properties in a suburb. Given the typically small sample size, the vacancy is often an unreliable metric at the suburb level. Volatility in an historical chart for a metric is a great indicator of unreliable figures for that metric. Now, with values for the metric going up and down each month, how can we know what the true value for the metric is currently? To help estimate a more reliable value, we can apply a trend line. Let me show you how. I click on the pencil icon for the vacancy rate plot. The dialog opens again. Notice at the bottom left there is a checkbox labelled Advanced. Now, whenever I'm plotting a secondary metric, I like to display it on the chart as a sequence of vertical bars rather than lines. This helps distinguish it from the primary metric plots. So I'm going to switch Show As from line to bar. Now here is where we can switch the plot from a set of volatile points to a trend line. A linear trend line will put a straight line of best fit through all the points on the plot. For longer periods, these may be a bit misleading, so instead I'm going to plot a 6-month moving average. If I save that change, the plots table shows that the vacancy plot is to be shown as bars and it is to be a trend line, and the trend type is moving average. All right, let's see how that looks. You can see that the chart now shows vacancy as bars. And you'll notice that those bars do not look as volatile. The 6-month moving average has smoothed the plot. Now there looks to be a rising trend in vacancy rates recently, and that was not obvious when we were looking at each month's individual figures. Trend lines can be used to help interpret volatile metrics. You can add up to 10 plots to a chart. However, that many plots can make the chart a little hard to read. Hover over parts of the legend to make plots of interest stand out from the rest. Now, you may prefer looking at short-term charts or long-term ones. You may prefer bars over lines. You may like to always compare suburbs to the national average. Whatever your preferred criteria are, you can save it to prevent re-entering all those details again in the future. Click on the Criteria button and a dialog will appear. A default name is provided, but you can change it to whatever you like. You can save multiple criteria in case there are different types of charts you frequently view. One of your criteria can be marked as your favourite. Whenever you return to the historical chart page, your favourite criteria are automatically set. There are some example criteria you will always see in this list. These are defined by the system and cannot be removed, replaced or renamed. Check out a few of those examples that get the most out of historical charts. You can click on the Get Quote button to see how much a chart will cost. Viewing the exact same chart costs nothing. The quote is broken up by plot. Different metrics have different base price. Within each plot, there may be blocks or periods over which prices are discounted. But sometimes old periods have a premium applied rather than a discount. To see historical chart reports again, click on the Get Log button. A dialog appears showing all the requests you've made in the past. Check the brief description for each to find the one you want to view again. Then click on the View link. This will close the dialog and load the criteria you had back when you originally requested that report. All you need to do now is click the Get Data button to see that report again. Now, I mentioned at the start that you can open the historical chart page from the home page, but you can also open historical charts from Suburb Search. A Suburb Search report will contain a table of data. Some cells in the table contain numbers. These are metric values for a market. You'll notice the number is a link. If you click on the link, a new tab will open in your browser showing a navigation page to further research the metric and market shown at the top of the page. One of the research options is the historical chart. If you choose historical chart, the market and metric at the top of the page will be automatically set in the historical chart page that opens. This makes it easy to view an historical chart for this market, for this metric, without having to select the metric and the market again. There's another way you can view an historical chart, via market metrics. Let me open the market metrics page. I'll click Get Data to view a market metrics report. Now you'll notice there is a column titled Historical Chart. There are 2 links in each cell. The link on the right will open the historical chart page in a new tab of your browser. The market and metric are already set in the fields, so all you need to do to see the historical chart now is click the Get Data button. Alternatively, you can modify some of your criteria and get a quote. That completes the tutorial on how to use historical charts. Use historical charts to look for trends, check for volatility, compare markets side by side, and calculate change in metric values.